Thanks to everyone for joining us for the fourth session of our Employees Playbook for Talent conversation today with Charm. And I am going to turn it over right away. So take it away.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Christopher. And I want to thank all of you for joining me here virtually today. I am so excited for the opportunity to connect with you on this topic that I am both personally and professionally passionate about. Say that 5 times fast. We are going to talk about creating workspaces that care. And I'm going to share, how we can apply a diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility lens to talent strategies. And so before we get started, I just want to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Charm Durr. I have been in the HR, culture, organizational development, and DE&I spaces for over 10 years. My education background is in public affairs. My undergraduate degree is in public affairs, and I have a master's degree in education. I also have my diversity and inclusion certificate from Cornell University. I am extremely involved in my community. And so here on the slide, I have just a few of my board memberships.
Thank you.
I'm the Diversity and Inclusion Director for Sheboygan Area SHRM. I'm also a member of the Sheboygan LGBTQ Alliance, Generations Intergenerational Center, and I am an advisor for Above and Beyond Children's Museum. So let's dive in. I have a few learning outcomes for us in today's conversation. So first, I want us to create a shared understanding of what diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is in a business context, right? So I know that we're all probably really familiar with what the definitions are, but just what does that look like for employers? And then next, I want to talk about how we can move from being intentional about diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility to actually making an impact with a model that I designed. And then next, after that, I want you all to, review 4 areas of opportunity to embed diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility into your organization with some low risk, high reward approaches. Okay, so I hope you all are ready to dive in. And before we really get started, I want to let you all know that I want this session to be interactive. For anyone who joined earlier on, you can already see that we were getting activated in the chat there. And so I want Christopher to launch a poll for us because I just want to understand my audience a little better and just know where everyone is in their DEIA journey. All right, so we have 2 responses. We're going to give it a few more moments because we want to try to capture as much of our audience as we can. And I'm going to have Christopher close the poll in 3, 2, 1. All right. So, okay, so we have about 50% of the audience not expressly working in diversity, equity, and inclusion space, but interested in the field. That is really awesome. Well, welcome. All right, so, we are at a pivotal moment in history to be having this conversation, right? And so, although diversity, equity, and inclusion isn't new to the business world, the topic has really been catapulted, right, to the forefront of the business world as organizations and their workforces are managing a global pandemic, also just a variety of social uprisings, as well as a few positive civil rights legislation that has been recently passed. And so, undoubtedly, these topics are making their way into the workspace. And also, as you can see on this headline in the bottom right-hand corner, the Great Resignation is something that I think I hear about every single day. And it's because a lot of people are, not staying with organizations who don't align with their values, Okay. And one way in which organizations can align with the values of their workforce and show their workforce that they care is to make diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility an imperative, right? And so in this group, we can definitely have this conversation because human created problems require human created solutions, right? And so things like sexism and ableism and racism, these are all human created social systems that directly negatively impact the personal lives and work lives of people in our communities and in our workspaces. And so, as community leaders, as business leaders, as individual contributors, as educators, it's really important for us to take an active role in solving these problems. And so now, I want to dive into the acronym of what diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is, again, with a business context. So we're going to start with the D. So diversity, those are our individual differences and our group and social differences, both seen and unseen. And I think that a lot of times in the workspace, we think about Title VII, right? But diversity really extends beyond Title VII. It involves things like neurodiversity, language diversity, religion, personality diversity, ability set. So all of these different things exist in the disability realm. Now, in the business context, diversity is really ensuring that individuals from different backgrounds and with different perspectives are represented at all levels in the organization. Okay, so I have a graphic to better illustrate this. When I first saw this meme, it just really made me laugh because it's so true. Oftentimes, organizations, if you look at them like a pyramid, at the bottom level is where there's diversity. So if we're looking at the frontline workers or frontline leadership, that's where all the diversity sits in terms of gender diversity, cultural diversity, and different things like that. And as you move up in the organization and you get into higher levels of leadership, then there's no diversity. There may be one woman or one person of color, and those are the organizations that say we value diversity and inclusion. But if this is the structure of your organization, that's not truly valuing diversity and inclusion because it's not active at all levels in your organization. And so now to talk about equity. So to put it very simply, equity is ensuring that everyone has what they need to be successful and to fully participate. And so, in a business context, that means that your organization's policies and practices are designed with an equity lens to ensure that information sharing, opportunities for advancement, support resources, all of these things are available to everyone in your organization, regardless of what their background is. And so, I also have an illustration for equity. So with equity, I often get asked, why don't I put a focus on equality? And I want to explain that, although equity and equality are both means of fairness, they do differ. And so I have this graphic here to better illustrate this. And so we're going to do a quick waterfall in the chat, which means I'm going to count down from 3. And I want you to put either 1 or 2, the number 1 or 2, which image do you think shows equity? Image 1 or image 2? All right, so I'm going to count down from 3. 3, 2, 1. No, fair, Amy, you've been in my presentation. And so, yes, image 2 is equity. Because you see, in image 1, everyone got the same thing. Everyone received a bike, right? But that bike isn't necessarily the correct fit for everyone. And it also leaves the person that's in a wheelchair excluded from participating. And so, the biggest difference between equity and equality is that equality works if we're all starting from the same point and we all have the same set of advantages. But we know that in our workspaces and in our communities, that's not true. And so now moving on to inclusion. So inclusion is an act, right? It's that active, intentional, and ongoing engagement with the diversity. And so, in a business context, that's ensuring that everyone in your organization feels valued, that everyone has the psychological safety to speak up and voice their opinions. And also that when people share their ideas, that it's not just heard, but that their ideas are actually considered. Now, for accessibility. So, with accessibility, if you're looking along the continuum of human ability and experience, it's ensuring that you're giving equitable access. And so, in the workspace, it's ensuring that people from all ability sets and all backgrounds can interact with your organization, um, from communication to having accommodations. And so, for example, if you're showing an e-learning, does that e-learning have closed captioning? What is the lighting like in your offices? Do you have spaces where people can go and just kind of decompress? Having alt text available to better describe photos. Those are all different ways in which you can um, provide a more accessible work environment for your workforce. And so, when implemented correctly, equity, inclusion, and accessibility help you to leverage diversity in your organization. And that's really important. And so now I want to dive into what the imperatives are for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. There are four imperatives that I want to share. So the first imperative is the moral imperative. And, very simply put, it means that it's just the right thing to do, right? The last time I checked, it's not right to discriminate against anyone, to treat anyone poorly, to stereotype or name call. And so I can't imagine that those things are okay to do in the workspace. And so that's the moral imperative. And the next is the personal imperative. And so, the personal imperative for this work is that you're going to grow both personally and professionally when you build diverse connections, right? Your experiences are going to change. Also, if you are a business leader, even if you're an individual contributor and you're inclusive, you're helping to shape this inclusive work culture, right? Which leads to a satisfied workforce, which then leads to high performance. The next imperative is the community imperative. And so this one is important because I don't often see or hear people talk about this imperative. But community is so important because community really determines where a person works and lives, right? Even if you're having a great experience in your organization and you feel like you're thriving, that can be just an insulated sense of belonging if when you come home or you're outside of the grocery store and you feel discriminated against and you feel shut out from your community. And so that's why I added that as an imperative to DEIA. And then the last imperative is the business imperative. And I know that, over the years, I'm sure all of us have been given tons of facts and figures on the business imperative, just, to illustrate how important it is for organizations to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive. But I also want to share some data, just a few touch points with you. And so in future years, the workforce is becoming more diverse, right? There's going to be more gender diversity. There are going to be more people of color. And then also people of all abilities, right? Technological advancements have aided in expanding that pool of talent of individuals who weren't able to work in like traditional office settings that can now work remotely. And also, this is some data that I just, that just really wowed me every time I look up these facts and figures. But 85%, that was CEOs whose organizations have a diversity and inclusion strategy say it has enhanced performance. And then 48% reported having higher operating margins generated by gender diverse management teams. Also, this last figure, $25 billion. There will be a $25 billion boost to the economy if just 1% more of persons with disabilities join the labor force. And so now I'm going to turn this over to you. If you can just put in a few words in the chat, why is diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility important to you? Why do you feel that it's an imperative? Just interacting with everyone here in the chat. All right. So my way isn't the only way, and I want to learn from others. I love that. Getting the best staff. Yes, Angela. To reflect the community as it is. And that's really important because, especially in Sheboygan County, we are seeing increasing amounts of diversity in our population, especially in our school system. To feel the sense that I belong and others feel the same. So true, so true. We have a very typical white male workforce, and I'd like to see our organization move beyond that, right? So to represent diversity at all levels in the organization, and that it impacts me both daily, professionally, and personally, and I want to help others have the same sense of belonging. I love all of those reasons. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. And so, I mean, I could use this chat alone to really set what the business imperatives are, but you really just echoed all of the sentiments on why it's important to make diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility a business focus and not just an initiative, right? Because when we set it as a business focus, then it becomes a priority for the organization. It really becomes embedded into the organization. And as an initiative, it can easily become, uh, something that the organization is going to say, well, we don't really have time or resources to focus on this. So let's focus on other things. And so, I'm asking this question. Is safety important to your organization? And I always advise people to approach diversity, equity, and inclusion work like safety, right? Because regardless of the industry that any of us are in, right, from healthcare to food service to manufacturing, safety is important. Organizations, put into place precautions to ensure that the community and the organization's workforce are safe, right? And so, when we look at DEIA as a safety issue, then that really makes it easier for us to kind of break down what it is that we need to approach it. If there were a safety issue in your organization, you would assign a group or a task force, or you would pay an outside expert to come in to help you navigate and resolve the issue, right? You'd identify what the problem was. You'd identify all of the groups that are being affected. You'd collect data on, how often incidents have occurred on any of the affected groups. You'd want to know, their demographics, right? You'd also work to identify what is causing this. You'd do a root cause analysis. You'd find solutions. You'd set SMART goals. So there's so many different steps in which you would take if it's a safety issue. And those are the same steps that you should take to be actionable about diversity, equity, and inclusion in your organization. And so, it's easy to say that we mean well, right? And we want to see change, but creating change is really what counts, right? Impact is where all the action is. And I have this quote here by John Henry. He's a co-founder and a co-CEO of this organization called Loop. And he says, hesitation costs you more than mistakes ever would. And I love that quote because now that we are, 18 months out from the tragic death of George Floyd and other social uprisings and the pandemic and all of these different social factors, now is not the time to hesitate. And it's also not the time to slow down and not be active in diversity, equity, and inclusion work. This is really time for us to all show that we care about this work, that we are passionate about doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And so I created a care model. And, this model it's centered on actions and accountability, right? Because my aim is to help to change behaviors that support diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I have a two-pronged approach. And so first, I want you to work on yourself. Okay. So internally, C is for commit. So commit to being a diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility champion. A is for acknowledge. Acknowledge that injustice and discrimination, that it's real, that it's happening in our communities and in our workspaces. Believe the stories of individuals who are from traditionally marginalized groups that are sharing their experiences with you. R, remember. So remember the imperatives that I just shared. Remember that there's a moral imperative, a personal imperative, a community imperative, and also a business imperative. And that you have a role in diversity, equity, and inclusion work, regardless of what your level is in your organization, regardless of your level of leadership. So from self-leaders to organizational leaders. And then E, educate yourself. There is so much information out there to consume in the DEI space. There are books, there are podcasts, there are magazines, there are webinars, which you're attending today, where you can find information. And also, I would caution too that when you're looking to educate yourself in this space, to make sure that you're taking time to educate yourself in a variety of topics related to DEIA. So, looking also at gender disparities, but looking at race, looking at LGBTQ plus community issues. Learn about disability rights. There are so many different spaces to educate ourselves in. And then the second approach is external. And so this is where the action happens, right? So C, connect. I want you to cultivate genuine connections with people who differ from you in your workspaces and in your communities. Because as I was saying a little bit ago, that's really where you grow in your experiences. A, advocate. Advocate for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in your community and your workspace. Speak up. Let people know that it's an imperative. Call out racism and injustice when you see it. And that's what I have here about being an upstander and an ally. And so for anyone who's in the audience that's not familiar with the term upstander, upstander is pretty much the opposite of a bystander. So an upstander is going to speak up against that injustice. They're going to speak up against the bully. And an ally is going to support the person who has been bullied. And so also for clarity, an ally can be an upstander. R, roadmap. Roadmap your DEIA strategy. And so this means take a strategic approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion work. I know that it can be, a pretty heavy load. This is not an easy feat, right? We're looking to change the work lives of people. But again, approach it as safety, approach it as any other business imperative, and create a plan of action for yourself. And if your organization is not able to do, um, you know, DEI strategic planning specifically due to resource constraints, when you're looking at your organization's general strategic planning, there's still an opportunity for you to write out what each of the DEI implications are as it relates to your business strategies. Because if it's related to humans, then there should be a DEI implication. And then E, evaluate your progress against benchmarks, right? Review your metrics, see how far you've come. There are different benchmarks out there. There's the disability um, index. There is the HRC, so the Human Rights Campaign Index for individuals, LGBTQ community. There's also diversity best practices, so the Inclusion Index. So there are tons of indexes out there where you can, evaluate yourself against and just even get an idea of what best practices are, and to see how your organization measures up to other organizations that are in the same industry as you, or even in the same area, because there are a lot of organizations in Sheboygan County who are on these best practice indexes. So we're a little over halfway through. I want to check in with the group. Just give me some thumbs up and let me know that you're still with me, and we can press ahead because we're coming up on the end of the presentation. All right, I'm getting some thumbs up. Okay, engaged. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. All right, well, onward. So now let's talk about low risk, high reward ways to impact diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the community and in your workspace. And so, as the name implies, your organization is going to have the potential for a high level of reward without a high level of risk, right? And so these are things that organizations can do at any size. Uh, and so, where to focus? So, I have 5 here. I had 5 on my previous slide, and I just want to clarify that one of them is the where to focus area, and then the other 4 are the exact business areas. So, where to focus? This first area that I want you to focus in is your talent strategy, right? Because your talent strategy, much like diversity, equity, and inclusion, is a people-centered strategy. And so here, when I'm going to talk about these areas coming up, we're going to talk about ways in which you can attract talent, ways in which you can affect the total employee experience. So that includes engagement, that includes development, everything in between. And then how are you going to retain talent? So these are going to be all measures that are going to help to support these talent strategies. Okay, so the first business area is your corporate social responsibility strategy and programs. I am sure that every organization on this call has corporate social responsibility, has a corporate social responsibility program. And so, I want you to think about your program. Are you supporting a variety of causes? Right? So, are you only donating or fundraising for nonprofits who are in the food insecurity space? There are other nonprofits that focus on mental health issues, that focus on veteran support. So, there are so many different causes that you can contribute to. Also, look at the organizations that you're donating to. I know that there are tons of major players in the area, and I am not by any means saying to not support them, but also just look to see if there are other nonprofits that are managed by individuals from traditionally marginalized groups. who also need support in their programming. Another way is to allow employees to engage in volunteerism and then track those hours and report that out in your sustainability report. So, right there, that is a talent attraction tactic because people are looking to see that organizations are engaged in their communities. And also, in terms of the total employee experience, people in your organization, they want time to contribute to their causes, to support organizations that they find value alignment with. Next, have a diverse group creating corporate social responsibility strategy. Is it only executive leadership and maybe the sustainability team putting that together? Try reaching out to the organization and seeing if there are any other causes or any other areas that the organization might not be thinking of in terms of supporting. Also, consider if there are any groups that are excluded from participating in your corporate social responsibility initiatives. So when I say this, I think of frontline workers, right? Do we allow them time to go out into the community and volunteer? Do we create ways in which they can easily donate to causes? An example of that is, we do payroll deductions at my current organization to allow people to contribute to causes. And so those are just a few things to think of with your corporate social responsibility. Next, organizational culture. And so this is a big one for me. Your organization's culture, it's unique to your organization, right? You can't copy another organization's culture. Organizations and their workforce co-create it. And so I always caution people to say, organizational culture is not, free pizza Fridays or ping pong tables, right? Because when we think of it like that, we don't give the entire workforce the opportunity to see that they affect it. Because I can't buy pizza for everyone every Friday, and I can't give you tables, and I can't give you beanbag chairs. So organizations and their workforce co-create the culture. It's really that social glue that holds you together and defines what the social norms are in your organization. So how people communicate, how people collaborate, who's included, who's excluded. And so when we think of our org culture, one way that we can embed diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is to ensure that our organization's values reflect DEIA. And this is really important because a lot of our organizations, have been around for years and years. And these value systems weren't necessarily written with DEI in mind, right? And when we talk about values, values are the guiding principles that influence the actions that people take in their organizations. And so it's really important to ensure that they reflect that. Also, creating a culture of equity and inclusion in internal communications, in meetings, in committees. And so, when I think about communications, I think about, if you're writing out a one pager or a toolkit, do you have an ability to have that information read out? Do you create voice recordings or e-learnings? Do you have closed captioning? Do you have alt text for photos? For meetings, when we talk about a culture of inclusion, do you just kind of lay some ground rules for meetings? Do you have ways in which you ensure that people are fully participating in meetings in whatever method they feel comfortable with? Are you going that extra mile? And even in committees, do you make a way for people to participate in committees, regardless of what their background is? Do you allow people to have the interest? If I am in the HR space and I also like to graphic design, this is a real example. I'm a creative and I love to graphic design. And so for me to have the opportunity to, be on a committee, if the marketing team is doing something that's extremely important, for total employee experience. Also, creating a culture of feedback and feed forward. And so this relates to performance, right? Are you having those continuous check ins? Is it a culture of continuous check ins with direct reports and their managers? Just to check in and see how your work is doing, but also checking in on you as a person. How are you feeling emotionally, mentally? Creating a culture of recognition and a culture of celebration. This is also extremely huge for talent attraction, total employee experience, and retention. It's a human need to, feel that feel that you belong, and to feel valued. And so having informal and formal recognition programs are very integral to that. Also a culture of celebration. So celebrating large and small wins and milestones. So just even if at the end of a meeting you have a little section about bragging rights, and you just kind of go around the room, the virtual room or the in-person room, and you just share what their recent accomplishments are, personally or professionally. That's how you create a culture of recognition and celebration. Um, Setting uh, parameters in place to prevent burnout. This one is extremely important. Um, and I have here about emails, no emails after 5 p.m. And so what that means is not that you can't, type up an email, but maybe wait and save and schedule that email to go out in the morning, right? Because when I'm seeing emails at 5 p.m. pop up on my phone, then that encourages me, even if I've, mentally clocked out of work by that time, that encourages me, well, I got to give this person an answer, right? And encouraging work life social harmony. That's also extremely important. We are humans, we are not machines. It's okay to not be okay. And it's also really important for us to take time to rest and reset. And then lastly, showcase your culture. I've talked to some organizations and they don't even openly discuss what their organization's culture is. And so taking time to illustrate what your culture is on your company's intranet and also in the public eye on social media. That's another talent attraction method. And so on to our third area, recruitment efforts. And so recruitment is extremely important right now. And I, suggest for all recruiters to have diverse social networks. That is key. That is key to bringing diversity into your organization. A way that I suggest for people to build their social networks to be in a more diverse space is to attend webinars and conferences that are about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So there are tons of webinars that are available. And, in the chat, share your LinkedIn. If you have a LinkedIn account, share your LinkedIn, share your email, let people know that you are open to networking. And when I talk about these webinars and conferences, I mean, they're in the hospitality space, IT. So, I mean, there are tons of different industries that are having these conversations. And so you'll also be in the same industry as someone. And so you'll be able to share best practices with that DEIA lens with them. I just attended a conference. I can't even remember which conference it was, but I just attended a conference and I met someone, and then we had virtual lunch a couple of days later. And she lives in Canada, and we both are writers, and we both love theater. And it was just a really great conversation to have, and a really great connection that I made. Also, build direct relationships with education institutions and organizations and community partners that serve traditionally marginalized populations. This is really important because I know that a lot of like software that recruiters use. They work with organizations kind of like as a third party setup, but also yourself. You can still build those connections directly with those institutions yourself. Also, on the during the interview process, include a question about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility for the applicant. Not to just like test the applicant's knowledge, but you're really just going to want to test their understanding that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a value and important. Also, um, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility commitment statements, those are not just for job postings. I know a lot of organizations have that. We're committed to having a diverse workforce and feel free to apply. We do not discriminate. But if you go to their company's website, they don't have a diversity statement, you know? And so it's really important to take a moment to make sure that your company's website is reflecting your company's values. And then lastly, for this slide, be prepared to discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion to candidates because candidates want to know. They want to know what your organization's efforts are in this space. They want to know how inclusive your environments are. And I have a question from Trisha. Do you have a sample interview question? Yes, I do. A sample interview question would be, can you tell me about a time where you saw someone discriminated against? How did you speak up or how did you support that person? Can you tell me how you ensure that people are, feel included on your team? Can you tell me about a time you showed gratitude to someone else? Or coworker, a question around coworker social support. Great question, Trisha. Thank you for that. And so the fourth and final area, and this is perfect timing because we're coming to the close of our session, employee learning and development programs. So, really take a holistic approach to learning and development. That means taking into consideration emotional health, physical well being, and also intellectual growth. All three of those areas. Do you provide learning and training in those areas? In my current organization, I started a webinar series that we call Connections. And it's an opportunity for me to bring internal, so organizational subject matter experts together to present on topics. And I also have people from the community come and present on topics. But what's really great about this webinar series is that it allows us to not only share organizational information, so to connect on organizational information, but it connects people on contemporary topics. And so we've done things about mental health awareness. We've done things around uh, diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Having psychological safety in the workplace. And I'm planning on doing something around meditation and relaxation in the coming months. In the new year, I want to do like a meditation Monday. And so really just having that holistic approach to it. Also, avail training opportunities for all employees to learn about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've seen a lot of organizations really focus those conversations and trainings and workshops for their corporate teams. But you should also make that available for all associates in your organization because, again, everyone has a hand in creating more inclusive work environments. Make sure there are continuous learning opportunities that are accessible. So, do you have on demand learning for individuals, right? In order to future proof our jobs, employees are continuously developing their skills and developing their knowledge, right? That's, such a key employee benefit for us to have this on demand information available for them. How do you, professionally develop people in your organization. Also, creating opportunities for cross-functional work and internal networking. And so this is so huge to me because this is kind of going back to my example of, me being passionate about HR, but then getting the opportunity to go work or, on a project with the marketing team, right? So without the correct structures in place to help people connect, some initiatives can, run the risk of falling flat. And so it's really important for people to be able to develop themselves in different areas of your organization. And then lastly, for this, review your leadership development programs for inequities and bias. When you look at your organization's emerging leaders programs or leadership development programs, who are the majority of the populations that are going through those programs? Question yourself on why there may be, if there are, why there may be certain populations who are always represented in your emerging leaders group, or your leadership program. Think about opportunities that you're not availing to other people. Think about if there's any type of biases. Again, this is kind of going back to that org chart that I showed a little bit ago. And so there are tons of opportunities um, for you to ensure that your organization is more diverse and equitable and inclusive and accessible to all. And so, before I end this, I do have one more ask of you in the chat. I want to know, how are you going to show that you care? How are you going to show that you care? I want you to just share in the chat for me one of the words here from the slide. Are you going to work, internally? Are you going to work to committing to being a diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility champion? Are you going to acknowledge that inequities exist? Remembering the imperatives, are you going to work on educating yourself? Are you going to look externally? Or are you going to make actions? I'm sorry, not look externally. Are you going to make actions externally? So connect with people outside of your current social circles and professional circles. Grow your network. Are you going to advocate? Are you going to be an upstander and an ally? Are you going to work on your road mapping, DEI? Are you going to work on evaluating your progress? So let me know in the chat. I love this. I see Angela is going to commit and connect. Internally, continue to learn. Externally, become a better upstander. I love it. We see Amy is going to educate herself and advocate. I love it. Commit to being a better diversity and equity champion and all around advocate. I love it. I love the exclamation marks. We'll discuss a roadmap within our organization to understand where we stand. I love that. And Trisha is saying, commit to being a champion. Commit to being a champion. And so I have nothing else to say besides thank you all for being here with me virtually today to have this discussion. Again, as I was saying earlier, I am both personally and professionally passionate about this topic, and so I'm just extremely honored at the opportunity, Christopher, to talk about this topic. When they reached out to me at the beginning of this series, and we talked about what would be important to discuss. It just really goes to show how much Lakeland really values diversity, equity, and inclusion. And thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Charm. We appreciate it. It's fantastic to have, speakers like yourself who are willing to contribute their expertise and to talk about these important topics. And we will continue to do so, and we hope that everyone will continue to join as well. We do have one more, but before I talk about that, does anyone have any questions I know we had a question in there previously, Charm. I don't know if how you
Yes,
feel.
I saw a question about the slide deck. I can actually do you one better. I can condense that into a handout, Christopher, and send it
Perfect.
out. So I'll send that over to Christopher. Just give me a few days and I'll get that together, and then Christopher can send that out to the group that attended today.
Yep. Perfect. Thank you so much. And we will, yeah, so absolutely. Does anyone else have any questions for Charm?
Yeah. Do you have any other questions? We have 8 minutes.
We
Um,
do.
questions. Well, my job is done. I've answered
Yeah,
every
you
question.
you crushed it. It was, I'd say, an amazing presentation. So much great information available. So many things to be done, so many different things to consider, and keep on working. So thank you so much. We do have one more presentation in this. There you go. Can we contact you if we need any insights?
Yes, yes. I'm going to I'm going to put my LinkedIn in the chat. Just give me 1 second to pull up my link to my LinkedIn. Definitely please connect with me on LinkedIn. And I will also put my email into the chat. So that's my LinkedIn email. Here we go.
Excellent.
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for asking that. Yeah. All right, so we do have one more session in this DEI series for Employers Playbook for Talent. Beginning of December, we will have one dealing with social justice in the community, and that will be brought by Lakeland's own Reverend Julie Mavity Madalena, and she will be talking about that from her perspective and her insights from the campus. And we hope that all of you are going to be here and join us for that final session. I will also have information at that time to share about our next series for the Employers Playbook for Talent coming in spring. So, with that being said, thank you again, everyone, for joining us today, and I will see you soon.